All right, I'm shooting at T1 right now on a 20 millimeter, which is pretty crazy on these Zhongji optics. They go all the way to T1 from T16. Pretty crazy, tiny little RF mount, Super 35 cinema lenses. So hopefully this is in focus. All right, today we're going to be talking about the DJI LiDAR system and my experience using it. I've used it now on 3 different shoots, 2 passion projects, one of them a fashion project, one of them just a super run and gun project, and then the other an actual lifestyle commercial. All of the projects were relatively low budget, which was perfect for this kind of tool because obviously when you don't have budget for a first AC, using something like the DJI LiDAR Focus to try to replace that job was an interesting test. I've tested it with 3 different sets of cinema lenses and cameras. Firstly, the red Komodo with some Angenieux vintage rehoused primes from GL Optics, as well as the Blazar Remus 1.5 times anamorphics and the Lomo square front anamorphic lenses. And there were some really interesting things that I found when shooting, especially with the Lomos, that are sort of restrictions with the DJI Focus that we'll get into later. But it really showed that this is a good tool when you're using it in the right context, but it cannot replace a first AC. I also want to give a shout out to my friend Ryan Cow. This is actually his DJI Focus unit that he lent me for all of these shoots. So big thank you to Ryan for letting me use it. The first and most impressive thing about the DJI Focus is that it can track faces really, really well. If you're on the tracking mode and there's enough light, it's going to lock onto that face. And the way that it tracks that face is really impressive, especially when you're at longer lenses or shooting wide open on a super wide open lens like this T1 lens I'm shooting on here. It's impressive how accurate and how quickly it can follow. It does have an adjustment period, so you can adjust how quickly it responds to the focus. And so it was worth messing with that a little bit, but I didn't actually find that it made that much of a difference going from like a 1 to 5 setting. There was 5 different settings you could change it on. And I didn't really notice it that much, but regardless of what setting you had it on, it did follow relatively quickly if your subject was like running towards the camera, for example. Regarding the tracking, the biggest issue I ran into is when you didn't have a person in the frame and you were trying to track like a logo of a product, it didn't really have the intelligence that a actual human focus puller would have to be able to stay focused on the product. If you're not shooting a human, you basically have to make sure that what you want in focus stays within the little box that's on the little handset unit that goes on the side of your camera while you're shooting. Otherwise, it's going to be completely out of focus. Now, you can actually override the focus in a mode called auto manual focus, which allows you to take the little control wheel that's on the side handle on the side of your camera and override what is being focused on. So as long as you can see your monitor and are semi-aware of what is in focus and what's not, you can actually pull focus so you get something like a logo in focus when you need it. It would be ideal if there was a way to click on like a logo and then have it track that, but I don't think that's just in the software yet. Also in my testing, I noticed that it did not work nearly as well in low light. I was shooting the super run and gun passion project, and as we were shooting from blue hour into nighttime, we were really pushing the camera shooting at 3,000-4,000 ISO. And as it got too dark for the LiDAR system to see, I definitely noticed the focus fall off to the point where I completely changed it to manual focus. And I think that says a lot about the limits and the capabilities of this unit. It's really good when you have enough light and when you have faces in the shot, but in other more niche scenarios or scenarios where you don't have those parameters, it's going to fall apart faster than, of course, a human focus puller would. Obviously, this isn't going to replace a first AC because the DJI Focus unit cannot help you switch lenses and carry all your gear and any of that, but just as a focus pulling unit itself, it's quite impressive especially for the price. When you consider spending, I think it's $1,000 for just the little hand unit. If you have enough passion projects where you're one-man band solo videographer kind of jobs where maybe you don't have budget for a first AC, but you want to shoot on some nicer cinema glass, this is a great middle ground to be able to shoot on some nicer glass and have the capabilities of autofocus in your back pocket. It is really nice to know that there is this sort of backup system because as somebody who wants to shoot the best possible images, but sometimes on those passion projects, you don't have budget for a first AC and you can't always pull that favor. If you know somebody who has the DJI Focus unit or you can rent it from the local rental house, that's going to be way less expensive than paying a full rate for somebody like a first AC. Obviously, if you can, the first AC is going to be way better than the DJI Focus unit, but this is a great happy medium where if you have some nice cinema glass, but you don't have somebody to pull focus, it sort of takes that challenge away from you're already operating the camera. You don't want to have to think about the focus, especially when you're shooting a human subject in your frame. Okay, one other issue that I didn't mention that is actually quite important is the way you calibrate the lenses is actually quite intuitive. It does take some time, so you do have to do that on a prep day beforehand where you have to input the focal length of the lens and then calibrate the focus. But during that process, when you are calibrating the focus, you're supposed to move the camera and lens 1 meter away from a subject and then focus on that, and then 4 meters away from a subject and then focus on that. And that's what calibrates the distance between and the focus throw of the actual lens. But the problem is when you're shooting on some tighter focal lengths or anamorphic glass, like I mentioned earlier, some of the shoots that we had for this were on the square front Lomo anamorphics that were rehoused. And the close focus of those lenses is more than a meter away. And so the problem is with the current software that DJI has to calibrate the lens, you can't actually calibrate that close focus mark because the close focus distance of a Lomo anamorphic lens is more than a meter away, and there's no option to adjust on the DJI Focus system how far away you want your calibration points to be. Now, this didn't ruin the use of it entirely. Only when you started to get closer to your close focus on a lens that was calibrated improperly did the focus start to go out of focus. But if you're at a far enough distance away or at infinity, it could still use the autofocus even on those lenses. So you should do your own testing with each different lens that you want to put on this, but just note that it's not a perfect system. It can't be used with all cinema glass because oftentimes with anamorphic glass and with longer focal lengths, your close focus is not going to be close enough. So I'm hoping that they can fix that in a software update to allow custom focus points for when you're calibrating the lens. But for now, that's kind of a big downside. The battery life was pretty decent, although it's worth noting that I did find myself swapping the battery twice throughout the day on like a 10, 12-hour day. One more thing to think about when you're shooting, obviously if you don't have an AC, which you probably don't, if you're using this, you have to be thinking about the batteries. There are 2 different sizes of hand grips that you can get. So if you have 2 of the big ones, you might be able to get away with just using 2 of them throughout the day, only swapping it once. But it is nice in the sense that you only need 1 battery to power the whole system, to power the handle that has the little manual focus wheel, to power the actual LiDAR unit that you have to rig on the top of your camera, and also to power the focus motor. If it were me purchasing this, I actually wouldn't even buy the separate handset they have. If you're trying to be a real first AC, frankly, the DJI Focus system has some features lacking that on big sets you might start to notice. I think this is more of a useful tool for those solo videographer shooters, for those people that want to shoot on cinema lenses but don't have access to budgets enough to bring on a whole camera team. This is a great system for that, and you can just buy it without the wireless handset. And if you really wanted that later, you could just upgrade to it. But frankly, if you have the system rigged like I did with just the hand wheel on the side, that's going to be enough for most productions where you're just running and gunning yourself. If you want to see some example footage of what we shot with it, I'll leave a link to my Instagram down below. That's where I'll be releasing all 3 of the projects that I shot using the DJI Focus system. If you have any questions about it, be sure to leave a comment down below. I'll try to answer them as best I can. Hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you in the next one.